to our live session. This is Eva Hussain, Director at Polaron, speaking to you from Melbourne, where it's a bit of a muggy day, not much sunshine, but it is kind of summery, so we're not complaining. I wanted to introduce you to somebody very special this morning, someone that I've known for some years, but we kind of lost touch, but reconnected via LinkedIn. And her name is Ranmalee Mendis. She's from Monash University. She works as a project officer. Good morning to you, Ranmalee.
Morning, Eva. Pleasure to meet you and be online.
Really good for you to join us. And you and I have a lot of things in common. One of the things we have in common is that we are migrant women, I guess, not to put anybody in the box. The other thing we have in common is that we work in the professional space. And the third thing is, I guess, that we speak a number of languages and we call international superwomen, right?
Yes, super.
Yeah. Tell us, what do you do at Monash? What's your job there?
Yeah, so I've been in sort of the higher education sector for a number of years, and at Monash I've had a number of different roles, but at the moment I manage some of our strategic international partnerships.
And it's an ever-changing, ever-evolving space, particularly right now. What is happening in the sector? How is the sector pivoting? How agile are big institutions like Monash?
Yeah, look, I think it's a challenging sector for the higher education industry in general. The number of things that are going on right now. Mostly COVID's impacted a lot of those revenue streams from some of our international students, and that's not just impacted the education side of things, but also the research side of things. But I think we've pivoted really well if you think about how big and large these organizations are. To be able to deliver some of these programs online. And I would say we're really quite well placed to do that. I think the challenge is sort of sustaining this model and working out what a hybrid model might look like as we we come out of lockdown.
So are you talking about workplaces, or more how universities as institutions, for example, or global institutions that are large and perhaps not as agile as smaller businesses are going to function?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, not just sort of on the sort of professional side of things, if you're talking about a work context, but also socially as well. How you sort of move from being sort of indoors and working on sort of video platforms, and then sort of moving out into meeting your friends physically. I think that's the challenge we're sort of facing right now, sort of dipping toes into meeting people. But and I know people talk about this new normal. I personally think it's going to go back to the old normal. And take a bit of time, but in between, if you're talking about having a hybrid model, how that actually works in practice, I think it's quite challenging, and it'll question why you might say want to get people in a room. It'll question your intentions of what you're trying to do a lot more.
That's so interesting you say that. So when I hear the word or the expression new normal, it confuses me, because I think it probably means different things to everybody. And the word normal even is a strange one to hear, but the old normal, I like that, because I guess what you're trying to say here is that there'll be more of that human connection that at the moment we don't have, because we spend all day on Zoom. And so how would you say what happened with COVID, which is what we wanted to talk about, has affected communication, firstly in a big institutions like the one you work at, and secondly in your own space, which is a little bit different than just working, for a university, for an educational institution, because you're also very enterprising. And we actually met over a little project that was really quite successful for a little while, of connecting migrant women. So if you could maybe tell us your thoughts, your ideas about how firstly communication change and how it's going to change into the future.
Sure. So I might answer that in two parts. The first part is looking at a professional context. So really what's changed is we've been forced into a video platform, video conferencing, things like Zoom. So it's very much something similar to this, but we've also got shorter attention spans. So we're seeing perhaps having more shorter meetings, but more often, having more focused agendas in these meetings, being a lot more intentional about who and how you might communicate, because you don't see them in the office, and generally just communicating more, so over communicating. And also the context of communication is sort of looking at how you can collaborate online. How do you replicate those whiteboards and post-it notes that you had in a physical meeting? And turns out there are actually a number of platforms out there. I suppose you have tools like Slack, where you can communicate both synchronously and asynchronously. You have a tool called Miro, it's like an online Jamboard. So that there are things, I think there's been a lot of been a positive direction in the way that we can try to replicate that in-person experience. Also, we're seeing a lot more of the executive leadership teams communicating more frequently and with a lot more empathy. On the social side of things, there's some really innovative ideas that have been emerging. And really, it's you're seeing some of these in-person events being replaced by having an idea of sending something physical, like a box or toolkit, ahead of having an online live masterclass. In fact, today I signed up for a olive tasting workshop. They sent me a little box kit, and I have later in the evening, I have a sort of 1 hour intimate sort of masterclass. So you're seeing a lot of that, online games, online karaoke, even online video dating, but you're also seeing these online social hours being deliberately scheduled in a professional context as well. One thing I wanted to mention is that, generally these connections have been within known circles, and it's really hard to establish new connections. Something that I came across, which I found quite interesting, is something called Lunch Club, and I can sort of put this in the links later on. And that's an online networking. This group, they curate online professional connections. So depending on what you're looking for, and then arranging a mutual time to meet, all online. I've been doing this for a couple of months, and I've been connected with people in Melbourne and also outside of Australia in a similar time zone. And I found it really interesting and really engaging, and sort of replicating that experience. And also there's been a lot more technology to recreate that in-person experience. So I recently came across this platform called Run the World, which organized speed networking sessions. So I think the technology has been evolving really quite quickly, but the challenge then, as I sort of mentioned, as we come out of COVID-19, how do you bridge that sort of hybrid experience? And by hybrid, I mean you might have both in-person and people online at the same time. So how would you manage an event or a meeting like that when you've got these two groups? So, and I think that's sort of, we're all sort of learning, it's sort of coming into that, because I do think that it'll be hard to, you don't also want to be duplicating efforts. So I think there has to be a bit of more intention about thinking about what you hope to get out of that session, and then organize accordingly.
And what about things like creativity and just the human factor, and being able to interact with people on a sort of more organic or unscripted way? Is that completely lost, or do you think technology will somehow provide a platform for that, or we will find a way, or we'll get used to it? Because I think it'll be pretty sad if everything's replaced by Zoom. That'll be my nightmare, to be honest. But it's got a lot of. You've mentioned so many benefits. But what are some of the drawbacks, and what happens? What do you do to maintain that creative streak, that organic, unscripted way of communicating?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. I mean, it's something that I think about as well. But if you think about it, it's the perfect time to be creating or starting anything new, no matter how crazy you think the idea is. I think with the sort of this organic connection. So the offline equivalent would be perhaps to go to an event organized by Meetup. Well, they're actually going online, so it's just moving the mode of communication. But I must say it is a bit harder sort of meeting new connections when you don't see them in person. It's a good proxy having something through video. I think once we go back, into sort of post-lockdown, given the choice, I think people will revert to face-to-face. Sort of having, because that's what's been missing. But there is a place for having sort of these online Zoom type video conferencing platforms, and you'll find that, you know, whereas the early sort of iterations of these platforms was more just a straight on video, now they're looking to build in a lot more interactivity into their platforms, where you have breakout sessions, you can have an avatar, sort of trying to do that. But I think nothing can replace the face-to-face, and you do need to have that. So I think once things are maybe a little bit more stable, we will go back to this. Because if you think about it, the pandemic that occurred, you know, 100 years ago, everyone went, it's not, I mean, I know we didn't have the technology then, but I do think it's just something we're doing in response to something we're forced to. But if we're not forced to, I think if we had that choice, I think we might just go to something that's a bit more personal and face-to-face in real life.
Right, and I think it's also created this speed of the change. So we may have got there sometime, but we're now already in the future that we kind of imagined or predicted. I don't know if you know this, Ranmalee, but you're quite an inspiration, I think, for a lot of people, myself included, because when we met you, this is probably like 7 years ago, I think you were, well, not necessarily starting up, because you have, you know, long-standing professional background and provenance. But tell us about your journey into where you are at now professionally. And, you know, coming from an English-speaking country, but, you know, to an English-speaking country that's really quite different, because Australia is a very interesting amalgam of cultures, and it's very quite different to where you've come from. And I came from a non-English-speaking country, another thing altogether. But in terms of your professional journey, could you just tell us how you made it, if I can call it that way, and what sort of supports did you have? How did you keep yourself resilient and moving forward? Do you have like a life plan? Do you have, you know, do you sit down at the beginning of every year and you map it out and you make it happen? What happens?
I wish I could say I sit down and plan. There's a general plan, but what actually happens is quite different. But my brief journey, so I was born in Colombo and I grew up in Singapore, where I spent most of my life. And for the past 9 years, I've been based in Melbourne. In between, I lived in London and also Newcastle, New South Wales. I switched careers. So I was quite early in my careers in auditing at PwC. And I switched to the education sector by working in a business conferences company, a school, and perhaps most recently in higher education sector at Monash Uni, and just before that at the National University of Singapore. I really enjoy the education sector. There's something about being immersed in a dynamic learning environment where you're shaping young minds, and also in the midst of researchers creating impactful research, and something quite highly motivational about it. And I remember a colleague once remarked, it's an industry where your customers or clients kind of stay the same each year, but you age every year. You know, in terms of kind of moving, so I think it's a challenge. I mean, Singapore, for the most part, I would say, is quite sort of English speaking. It's quite multicultural. In some ways, I found it quite similar moving to Melbourne. I didn't find it a huge cultural shock, but I think the key challenge when you first move is really trying to find your tribe, finding people and making friends, particularly as you come in sort of a little bit older and you're not into, so you don't come in as a university student. I found it really challenging. And for about, you know, a year or so, I was just going for this event, that event. And I mean, I have a close circle of friends right now, but even then, I do still find the need to connect to new people and cultivate new relationships, quite professionally and socially. And the thing that, to answer your question, what kept me resilient is really knowing that you have to do a little bit of this sort of go out and put yourself out there and be prepared to say, okay, no, I don't want to be a friend, or no, I don't think we should connect. I think you have to be prepared to do that, knowing that ultimately there will be some pot of gold at the end of the journey. And yeah. I would say that I haven't found the pot of gold, but it's getting there.
That's so interesting, Ranmalee, because the way that I explain it to people that are not migrants, and I think once a migrant, always a migrant, is that it's not like you can bump into your high school friend here, you know. And we do, in the Polish language, we explain it by sort of transplanting a tree that's rooted. So it's much harder to do that to a tree that's older and more established than a younger.
Exactly.
It's sort of, it's a little bit like that. But what would you say? So you were talking about the conscious effort of getting out there and challenging yourself to expand your networks. But what would you advise advise people that have just arrived or might feel a bit intimidated or not really know what to do and how to build those networks, those connections?
Yeah, I think it's important. Like, I think you want to feel safe. And there are a number of, if you sort of go to some of these meetups, I think it's about experimenting a little bit. And let's say you find one group, actually really you just need one person initially. It's sort of working through who you know. So you might say, okay, you go to an event and you find someone that you connect with. You might then ask that person, oh, do you know someone else? So it's rather than, sort of starting a scratch every new, but all the time. But I think the other part is also taking a bit of initiative, because this is something I remember. I was always waiting for others to invite me. But then I realized actually when you start initiating a meetup or something, then people are actually drawn to you as well. And so that's sort of two things. One is trying to work with who you do know, and the other is also taking some initiative to organize something. I think those are two things that I personally found quite helpful.
Yeah, and they really stand out in the way that you've explained it. But of course, it's all about building confidence and leadership. And yes, you're going to stand in that corner maybe a bit awkwardly for about 10 minutes. But then, when everybody realizes that everybody's awkward,
Exactly.
hopefully the energy and maybe
cancels out.
helps. But you also have quite an enterprising backbone, I guess, to put it this way. Tell us more about your little initiatives that you get off the ground every now and then. What's the newest baby?
Yeah, so maybe before the newest baby, the oldest baby, and that's something you sort of mentioned. So sort of rising from these themes, I started something called Project 35. Back when I sort of first moved here, I was finding it hard to meet people, waiting for others to initiate things. And I also felt I wanted to do something charitable. So I decided on one weekend, I think it was a Saturday night, I was all alone and feeling sorry for myself. And I thought, oh my goodness, I feel so socially isolated. And then I Googled this and I realized actually I don't really have a reason to be feeling this way, because I can do something. People are feeling socially isolated, perhaps the people who, maybe the elderly or people who can't, have some mobility needs. And then I decided I had to make a change and be quite bold. And I came up with this project where I would meet 35 new people and ask that they introduce me to 35 new networks. For each person that would introduce me to a new network, I'd make a donation, $35. And I combined it into a lump sum and finished the project in about 1.5 years. I met 35 people who introduced me to 35 new networks, and I've got a blog about it. And I found that the minute sort of you're just making a start, it really helped. And I sort of did this through a combination of emailing a few interesting people and then going to as many different types of events as I could find and I could attend. And it was really a really good learning experience for me. And I'm glad that I did it. So that's one sort of enterprising old baby. My new baby is sort of trying to combine the idea of learning and networking. I find it quite easy. I find it more effective sometimes to listen to someone and just hear directly from someone and get the context of certain things. And I started something called pickmybrain.live, which was essentially about bringing the concept of picking someone's brain, but online. So something like this, but maybe more in a sort of small group setting. And look, it's something that's still in progress, and it's quite hard sometimes to do these things on your own. So, if there's any sort of words of advice, is find a friend, find a co-finder who can help you.
So I do have two questions. Speaking of picking your brain, why 35? Why did that? What was there some sort of a scientific?
It was, let's just say, it was a milestone milestone journey in my life.
Right, we can guess probably what that is, but we're not going to mention
That's
that.
right.
That's good. And what did that teach you, apart from the obvious of connecting with people, but getting something like that off the ground, and you called it our baby? What did that teach you? What sort of leadership skills have you developed going through that process?
Yeah, so look, the 35 on that blog are the 35 successful ones. So I had to approach at least maybe 50 to 60 different people. So my hit success rate was about, maybe about 60 to 70%. So really my biggest learning experience from that was, because I'm also quite introverted. I'm not naturally sort of a out there, gregarious sort of person. So for me, the biggest learning experience was that I had to really brace myself to develop some kind of thick skin in anticipation of being rejected. And I think this applies to most parts of our life when you're starting something new. But I think the other biggest thing was just making a start, no matter how small, because you get your feedback. I think a lot of times people think, oh, you need to have this perfect concept and plan. This isn't perfect, but I think the market speaks, and I think sort of broadly, we're looking at sort of things like user experience, where you engage with whoever you want to engage with quite early on in the process of your initiative. So yeah, those are some lessons that I'll continue to take with me.
That's amazing, and I think having that initiative to do something, and as you said, we're not going to be talking about hungry children in Africa, of course, but when you think about, okay, well, yeah, there are people that are worse off. Why aren't they doing something? That's the kind of approach that you had, and I think even if it fails, or even if it's not as perfect, doing something and connecting people is a really great way of building yourself up and your own confidence. And if you're not a extrovert and a sort of bubbly person, I'm not, this is an act, it's completely put on, but challenging yourself really can, so you can grow into the shoes that you've imagined for yourself, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But in terms of the last 9 years, Ranmalee, so have you found that you've changed as a person, like, and in terms of also communication, because that's what we're talking about. So from coming from somewhere, from being an outsider, do you feel like this is your home now? How have you grown in that?
Interesting question. I think I'll say I have two homes, because my family is in Singapore, and I'm sort of I'm here on my own. So I think just simply because I was born there, I have that. I was born in Colombo, but I spent most of my time in Singapore. So I always have that affiliation. So Melbourne, I would say, is my second home. How have I changed? In some ways, I feel being outside of sort of my home country, I feel a lot more bold. So I feel that I've become more of a risk taker, more willing to try different things, compared with if I was maybe back home in Singapore. So I've also become maybe a little bit more outspoken and willing to ask for things. And that's something that sort of evolved in sort of the past 9 years. But also asking nicely, not demanding. But I think there is a certain art to sort of negotiation and trying to trying to sort of achieve the outcome you want. So I'd say that's maybe been the biggest change for me, because even sort of growing up, I was pretty quiet. Didn't want to make too much noise, didn't want to be visible. But I'm slowly becoming a bit more comfortable with the idea of being more visible, and looking at social media and things like that. That part is still relatively new, but I think it's an exciting opportunity and something to learn.
So ask and you shall get. Speaking of which, we do have a few questions from Andrea. So look, Ranmalee, thank you for presenting that information. And I know that being live like this on video on Facebook, on whatever, can be a bit, you can be a bit vulnerable, but I think you did such a good job. And I really, truly mean sincerely that you're quite an inspiration, because you're an example of someone that just does things, I think, and it's both in your professional and personal capacity. If you can change one person's life, and even if it's your own, and even if you can grow into the shoes or into that person that you want to be, that's a really good example of how to do it. So Andrea, I'll hand over to you for questions, please.
Thank you, ladies. So the first question will be, How do you think are, or what do you think are the skills needed to build a successful networking, Ranmalee?
Okay. I think the key thing is really to be open, and not expecting a necessary sort of two-way reciprocal, oh, I must get something out of this meeting, of this connection. I think that sort of approach is not really, that's not going to help. I think that's one. And the second thing is also realizing that, so look, I must admit, to me, the idea of kind of networking, I find it really hard. And I think the approach, I think, is it's more of building a relationship, and to build a relationship, it takes time. So I think that's the other sort of aspect. And then the third is, so maybe you're not expecting it doesn't mean that you can't offer what you have or what you want to share. I think people always appreciate something that's insightful, something that will help the other person. And when you keep doing that, I think you become front of mind for some of the organizations you might want to join, or some people you want to connect with. And it's quite, you have your platforms like LinkedIn, you can easily follow, you can easily share. I think the idea is also creating a network to get people drawn to you. And to do that, you need to sort of do something, maybe some kind of initiative. It can be anything, or you work with people. But I would say the key thing really to networking is being open about where the connection could lead you. And sometimes it doesn't, and I think that's okay. I think you just need to sort of also expand your traditional network. So not just from your own industry, but just different things that you maybe wouldn't have thought of initially, and doing something, exploring some new themes in your life.
Thank you. Talking about relationships, as you mentioned before, how do you think someone can get a more meaningful relationship from a networking event, for example?
More meaningful relationship. So I think it kind of goes back to the first point about being open, but I think it's a two-way thing. So I think one thing I realized, a mistake I made quite early on in my career, was not keeping in touch. And I also didn't have those platforms. I didn't really have LinkedIn and all that. But I think if you want to make something meaningful, you have to, well, first of all, it's a two-way thing. So I think if someone else is not being reciprocal, I wouldn't push it. But I think if there is that initial bit, I think it's about staying in touch, once in a while, and maybe offering to meet, for coffee. Maybe we can do that now, or just even online. So to create something meaningful, I think you have to create some kind of value, and at the same time, you also want to help yourself, right? I think, let's be honest, we want to get something out of it as well. But I think that comes later, and perhaps it comes naturally as well as you start to build that relationship.
No more questions, ladies, at the moment?
I definitely have one more. I have a couple here, but I think we've got virtually 2 minutes. So Ranmalee, if you were thinking of yourself 9 years ago, what advice would you give yourself? Just one piece of really decent, really useful advice.
Do not be afraid. It's okay. I think I would have, if I look back now, I think I would have, it's easy to say this now, but I think if I had maybe ventured a little bit more beyond my sort of initial circle, and maybe did it quite quickly as well. So maybe a rapid exploration of everything that's out there. I think that's something that I would have told myself to do.
And there's one other quick question. What's your tip for overcoming fear of failure?
So I think the tip is just acknowledge, yeah, it's a failure. People say, yeah, it's a learning experience. Yeah, it is a failure too, but I think there's nothing wrong with failing. I think that the part is really being resilient and moving on from it. So if we look at a lot of successful leaders, they don't let any failure, they just learn from it, pick yourself up, and that's the key thing. Learn from it and don't make the same sort of mistake. But I find in Melbourne, people are generally quite helpful, and generally quite open as well. But perhaps it's about maybe, as I said, exploring the different meetup groups that are out there, and finding something that resonates with you. And it does take a little bit of time, I think. So yeah, do not be afraid of rejection.
And that's hard, isn't it? But Ranmalee, you've got such a wonderful positive energy and this quiet confidence that I'm very admiring of. And I think you're a deep thinker, and I think you do connect people. And I'm one of them that we've connected, a couple of times over the last few years. And it's the kind of relationship that you can pull in and out of. Like there's no I don't know what to call it, but there's no obligation to stay in touch if it doesn't work at one particular point. But I think you are someone that is very open to connecting. And when we said, can you come and talk to us, of course you said yes, and I was very pleased to see you again. So from us at Polaron, I wanted to thank you sincerely for sharing your experiences, and do not be deceived. This woman's let me tell you, she does wonderful things in her own special, quiet way. And I think overcoming that fear of rejection and that anxiety that's so natural to so many people is something that you should be proud of. And I certainly have taken lots of your tips on board, and I'll try and life is an ever learning thing. You can't ever stop learning. So thank you. I'll hand over to you just for the last few words, but sincerely thank you, and we wish you best of luck with your work and with your little projects, and maybe there's a third baby on the way, I don't know, but whatever it is, keep in touch.
Thanks so much, Eva and Andrea, for the opportunity. I found this to be really really an engaging session, and if there's anyone in the audience who wants to pick up any other points, feel free to look for me on LinkedIn, DM me, send me a message, or on Facebook, and we can stay connected.
That sounds great. And I think is your blog still active, or?
It is. It's hard to find, so maybe I can share the link and you can send that out. Yeah.
Because on top of everything, Ranmalee is an excellent writer. She's a very creative and very engaging writer. So believe me, find the blog, have a bit of it. And again, if you have a need to be I guess mentored by somebody informally, Ranmalee is your person. And thank you so much. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Ranmalee.
Thanks, Eva, Andrea.
Bye.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks, Andrea. Bye-bye.
Bye.